Hello there, welcome back to the channel. I am Grand Moff Tony. Now, you probably had to tell already things are going to be a little different in this week's video because I figured for these review-style videos, I want to have an opportunity to have more of a comprehensive discussion of the subject. And so to that end, today I am joined by the unsung hero of my YouTube channel, the unseen backbone to the Grand Moff Tony brand. She is the only person to have ever beaten me at Star Wars trivia, and she did it twice. And as a result, I married her. It's my wife.
Hello, I'm wife.
Hello, wife. So to kick things off for our very first ever Star Wars media review on the channel, we are rather conveniently talking about the Ahsoka series that just this week had its final episode. Now, I'm not going to sit here and just go over everything that happened. I'm assuming if you're watching a review, you've already seen it. So what we're just going to do is we're going to break this down into segments. We're going to talk about the series. We're going to talk about our initial impressions, some plot and character analyses, talk about some of the themes and messages, some memorable moments from the series, and some of our reservations about the series and things that maybe didn't quite land as well as they could have. And I know you've got some thoughts, and I have some thoughts.
I do, yeah.
So that'll be very interesting to get into. So yeah, without further ado, let's just get cracking. Now we'll get the brief synopsis flavor text out of the way. The Ahsoka series is set after the fall of the Galactic Empire, and it follows former Jedi Ahsoka Tano as she investigates an emerging threat to a vulnerable galaxy. Great setup for any series as far as I'm concerned. It's an interesting time period, so I'm excited to talk about it.
Just quickly, I want to notate that the IMDb does say Jedi Knight, but she quit before she ever reached that.
It does say Jedi Knight,
so
and
that's interesting.
she was never formally knighted, so it's an interesting choice. And that comes up a lot in the series, actually. Like, she's referred to by pretty much everybody as a Jedi, even though she's been doing the whole I am no Jedi thing for about 15 years at this point. But that is an interesting point there. Okay, so obvious stuff out of the way. What were your initial thoughts going into the series before it came out? Like, when you heard it was announced, what were your first thoughts?
Before or after we saw the trailer?
Go way back to when we were watching that press release with Kathleen Kennedy, and she had that screen up that announced everything that was coming up, and we saw Ahsoka on the screen for the first time. What were you thinking?
I was pretty excited. You know, Ahsoka's one of my favorite characters. I wasn't really sure where they were going to go with it, because I know we see her briefly in The Mandalorian. At that point, we may have seen her briefly in the Book of Boba Fett.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't exactly sure, you know, at this point, does she know that Anakin, you know, turned back into Anakin, you know, just before his death? How would she find that out? I was hoping we'd get a little bit more of that in the series, which obviously we got a lot of that in episode 5. I didn't really know what to expect. The trailers came out and we saw that it was going to be basically Rebels season 5, which is very exciting because I love Rebels.
And yeah, I was pretty much in the same boat. Like, I was excited to have more Ahsoka, but like you said, when the trailer came out and we realized, oh, this is just a live action continuation of my favorite Star Wars anything. Okay, I'm all for it. And I don't remember when it happened. I don't remember like how early into the process it was, but as soon as I saw that little bit of flavor text on, I think it was on like StarWars.com or something, and it said it was following Ahsoka's journey to track down Ezra and Grand Admiral Thrawn, at that point I was sold. Like, I wanted this show like right now.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. I forgot that in Mando season 2 she was searching for Thrawn, so that was a pretty good indicator of what the show was going to be.
So after the trailers came out, like particularly the Star Wars Celebration one, or was it I think it was Star Wars Celebration, the big one, like the one that had all of the reveals in it. In the last few weeks coming up to the series, did you have any like preconceived notions of what we were going to see? Was there anything you were particularly worried about?
Not really. I don't like to get too in my head about what I think it's going to be like, just because I don't want to be disappointed. I don't want to come up with my own version in my head and then discover later on that, you know, oh, the version in my head was better. So I go into it with blank expectations. I've done that with all the shows. You know me, I haven't watched any Marvel trailers before we've gone and seen any of the movies for the past, 5 or 6 years, because they've put way too much in the trailers. That's why every time you wanted to watch an Ahsoka trailer, it made me kind of nervous, because I was like, I don't want to see too much of it because I don't want it to be spoiled. But that's one thing I have to say to Disney's credit, for the most part, especially for The Mandalorian. When we see a trailer, we're really only seeing the first 3 or so episodes,
right?
Which wasn't necessarily the case for Ahsoka.
I think there was like 8 seconds left of like the last 4 episodes by the time you reach that point.
Yeah, but there was only 1 or 2 scenes that, like obviously the scene with Thrawn on the Eye of Sion was, in the trailer, but we didn't see it till the very last episode.
Right.
But I'd say besides that, it was pretty safe to watch the trailers for the show. So I was just excited to see it. Looked like some pretty good action.
And actually, I would say like those scenes in the trailers as the show started coming out, that really, really helped to build the tension, because every time they were on the bridge of the Eye of Sion, I was like, is this it? Is he going to walk through the door? Like, is this where we're going to see that moment? And it really helped build the tension of the series. And yeah, I'm with you 100%. Like, I didn't want to have an idea, like too solid of an idea in my head of what I thought was going to happen, because even if I did, I would have been completely wrong. And that would have been fine. Like, I love being wrong, but I prefer just not having a clue going in. Was there anything that you were particularly like worried was going to happen? I know there was one thing in particular that you were kind of edgy about.
Oh yeah, I was not very excited to see the World Between Worlds, and it's not necessarily just because I didn't hate it when it showed up in Rebels. I think it made sense in the context of Rebels. I wasn't very excited to see it in live action just because you're introducing something that's a little bit more lore heavy to Star Wars fans that may not necessarily watch the animated shows, so they're not getting that
the
vibe.
payoff.
Yeah, that vibe of Star Wars in their live action stuff. So when they see it, you're automatically getting all these articles and, oh, they're gonna retcon the sequels, and it's it was exhausting immediately. And I know I think I was right. I don't think it was the World Between Worlds, but we'll get to that.
And I mean, you were right, because everyone was saying from the trailers, the scenes between Baylan and Ahsoka, where she's like coming to confront him, they were saying that was taking place in the World Between Worlds. And we said from the very outset,
that's a star map.
That's a star map. That's not the World Between Worlds. And we thought we were so confident. Like, I put it in one of my videos where I'm like, no, you know what? I'm gonna stick my neck out here and I'm gonna say that's not the World Between Worlds.
And it wasn't.
It wasn't the way. It was a star map. And we were right. But just because we were right about that, then obviously end of episode 4, start of episode 5, where she wakes up and it's the World Between Worlds. And then like all the anxiety comes flooding back and you're like, oh, what are they gonna do with it? Like, I don't know how many times Dave Filoni has to sit on screen and say it's not about time travel, it's not about changing established events, it's just what it is. It serves a role in the story. I don't know how many times he has to say that before these articles and these theories stop coming through.
Well, we talked about it yesterday. I feel like the Star Wars approach to quote-unquote time travel is the complete opposite to something like Back to the Future. Ezra's not going to go back in time and erase himself in the prom photo.
Right.
It's more along the lines of like Harry Potter. Hermione throws the rock and that causes them to leave Hagrid's hut, which is something that like a continuous loop.
Yeah, it always happened. Like, they were always back there.
So I feel like, if anything, that's what time travel in Star Wars would look like. It's something that if these events are happening, it's because they were always supposed to go back in time.
Right. Like Ahsoka disappearing in the temple on Malachor. We don't see what happens to Ahsoka, so we can logically infer that that's always what happened. Like, she always fell backwards into the portal and Vader was like, huh?
That happens at the end of season 2. So by the time you get to season 4, the Emperor's looking for this World Between Worlds, and we don't know how he found out about it. There could be legends, or Vader could have been like, yeah, I was fighting Ahsoka, and then she just disappeared. I don't know what the hell happened.
That's a really weird after-action report for Vader to give to the Emperor. Like, she was right there, man.
And he was like, oh, that sounds interesting. Maybe I should go get my Sithy hands on that.
Right.
So moving on from what our expectations were, what did you think of the characters appearing in live action? I know there's some of your favorite characters in all of Star Wars.
Right.
So
Rebels season 5, man.
Yeah.
Like, we're really going hard. Well, I know Ahsoka's transition from animation to live action it's already happened, it's already done. We've been with Rosario Dawson for a couple of years now, and there were issues with like how she looked and the length of her head tail things. I feel like they kind of remedied that in this series. Like, they're like, this is the best she's ever looked. She looked absolutely fantastic in this series, and I guess that just goes to prove that she could have always had the longer ones. Like, she's doing some of the most athletic and energetic stuff we've ever seen her do in live action, and she's doing it with these big floppy things hanging around her head. So, I mean, I can see where they were coming from. As I say, the design shift didn't bother me in Mandalorian at all, but I'm happy to see her looking more like she looked in Rebels, then...
And I think the Rebels look for all of the characters was very elongated. So there was, some shrinkage appropriate to happen with the head tails, but it's definitely a lot more accurate in Ahsoka. Yeah. And I was a lot happier with her look.
And there's a lot to be said about different artistic styles in Star Wars. Like there's a very heavy emphasis on a character's silhouette. Like you should be able to recognize a Star Wars character just from their outline. So that's why when a silhouetted figure with a cowboy hat and a trench coat walks out on Book of Boba Fett, you're like, oh my god, that's Cad Bane, before he's even come into full shot. Everybody knows Vader's silhouette. So I guess that's why it doesn't really bother me when a character looks a certain way in animation and then they look completely different, but recognizable, like instantly recognizable by their silhouette when they come to live action. So aside from just how she looks, let's get into how Rosario has like adapted Ahsoka's character. Because I think there's a definite shift, I think, after we see Ahsoka in one of her final Clone Wars arcs when she leaves the Order, to every other time we see her in canon. Like when she shows up in season 7, when she shows up in Rebels, and then when Rosario takes over, it's a very different character. Like she's very muted, she's very stoic, and you can always tell she's super troubled by the stuff that she's been through. She's not this energetic, wide-eyed, optimistic child anymore. She's been through some stuff, man. She's been treated by the rough hand a lot. And I feel like this version of her in this show completely balanced those two versions of the character, especially being as, the arc that she's on, like coming to terms with who she is and her identity as a Jedi and as Anakin's Padawan. There's so much of Anakin in her. It's crazy.
I saw a lot of rhetoric online about how Rosario doesn't do a good Ahsoka and, she's too stoic or she's too grumpy. And I think a lot of them don't take into consideration that when she was 16, she left the only family she ever knew and went to go live on a farm planet where she had everyone else that she knew was murdered by an Inquisitor. And then she immediately went right back to war, but working for the rebels.
Right.
So she grew up in war and now she's finally done with that. And I feel like she doesn't really know what to do with herself. And even Sabine is, like, when are you going to settle down? And I don't think she knows how.
Right.
And I think she's really struggling with the fact that her master went to the dark side and she sees a lot of him in herself. So she's constantly worried about, is she going to tip the scale and go that way? Or that's why she's been so hesitant to train Grogu and train Sabine.
Right.
Is because she's so afraid that she's going to pass on the traits that maybe she perceives that she got from Anakin.
I think it's interesting that if we follow like the series of events from Mandalorian to Book of Boba Fett to this, obviously to us the stuff with Grogu happened first, but I think narratively the stuff with Sabine happened first. Like it must have happened first. So maybe, there was peace and everything and she thought, yeah, I can do this. I can train a Padawan. So she takes on Sabine, and then obviously we get the revelation in the final episodes about why she stopped training Sabine. And maybe that's why when we do encounter her for the quote-unquote first time in Mandalorian Season 2, that's why she's so adamant that she's not doing this. Like, she's not gonna train a Padawan, especially if they've got such a massive bond to someone the way Grogu has with Din.
I think we all assumed that she was talking about Anakin when she said, I've seen what attachments like that do to the best of us. And obviously she was, but part of that also, I think, now that we have more context, could have also been about Sabine. She was afraid that if she unlocked her true potential, maybe she would go dark side to help Mandalore or take revenge.
Yeah, take
what
revenge
happened
against
on Mandalore.
Yeah.
Definitely some one-liners here and there in the show brought some more context to stuff that we had seen earlier on, which I really appreciated.
Yeah, it's crazy the balance that she's got, because she has such a wise and comprehensive understanding of how the Force works, and yet at the same time she's so jaded. Like, she's so pessimistic. Like, she's absolutely certain that Thrawn is going to return, but she only hopes that Ezra's still alive. Like, she knows Thrawn's alive, but she only hopes that Ezra's made it as well. Ezra's a good, 40 years younger than Thrawn. Like Sabine says, if Thrawn survived, I'm sure Ezra's doing fine. But she just can't see that. She's so trapped in, like, this negative bubble, and she's having a real hard time breaking out of it.
I think a lot of that might also have to do with fear. Like, she's potentially afraid of what Ezra still being alive could mean. Does that mean that he's been suffering this whole time and none of them have gone looking for him?
Right.
She's afraid to go looking for him because, she might find Thrawn. So maybe she's just as afraid of losing her friend in Ezra as she was losing Anakin.
And speaking of Ahsoka's conflict with her identity as a Jedi, I think that's a great opportunity to transition into somebody else who introduces themselves by saying they are no Jedi, which is Baylan and, well, by extension, Shin. I think two of the biggest standout characters in the entire series. I don't think anybody saw how great these characters were going to be coming when we just saw, two new characters with weird orangey red lightsabers. And, who are these guys? But Baylan particularly for me was an absolute standout in the series.
So good.
Yeah, and using that line, we are no Jedi, it just immediately thematically links him to Ahsoka, because obviously she's been saying that for 15 years. No one's listening. Everyone still calls her a Jedi, but she's been trying to tell people for years that she's not. And here's someone who not only says he's no Jedi, but when he broke with the Jedi, he also said, well, if the Order fell, then absolutely none of this is worth holding on to. Being a decent person, helping people out, I should just use my power to get what I want. And that's where the contrast between him and Ahsoka comes in, because even though she doesn't call herself a Jedi, she's not a Jedi in name, she still represents all the virtues and the values of the Jedi. And I think that in that way, she's almost more of a Jedi than some of the masters who kicked her out of the Order.
Yeah, I think they're honestly two sides to the same coin, because they were both let down by the Jedi Order. Ahsoka, everyone turned on her, thought that she was the bomber, so she had to walk away. And Baylan, however, he felt that he was let down during Order 66, except she chose to keep her moral founding that she learned from the Jedi, chose to remain being a good person.
Right.
And Baylan just said, if one thing was crap, it's all crap.
Right.
So I'm gonna just go this other way, and I'm gonna do my own thing and just kind of go wherever the power calls me to.
And he's taken on an apprentice and raised her the exact same way. Like, there's that moment in one of the episodes where Shin begins to kind of identify with Ezra and the way that Ezra was trained outside of the Order, and Baylan's immediately like, no, you're not like Ezra. He was raised to be a Jedi. I'm raising you to be something better, like something more. It's his warped version of better, I guess.
Yeah.
And even like the relationship as like master and apprentice between Baylan and Shin and Ahsoka and Sabine, they're two very different relationships. Like, Shin has this almost like, she's almost terrified of Baylan. Like, she gives him these looks sometimes where she's just, and I don't know if it's just the actress's eyes, but she looks terrified sometimes. Like, really worried about this massive hulking figure that's so powerful, and she just does everything he says. Even when Morgan tells her to do something, she'll always look at Baylan and go, is this an okay order to follow? Should I do what she says? And Baylan's like, yeah, do what she says. Oh, okay, I'll go do that. Whereas by contrast, you've got Sabine and Ahsoka, and Sabine straight up challenges everything Ahsoka tells her to do. Don't take the map. She takes the map. Don't go after Ezra. If you have to destroy the map, destroy the map. She goes after Ezra.
I feel like it's sort of representative of, obviously, Ahsoka's relationship with her master. She was the same way with Anakin.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Anakin was the same way with Obi-Wan. Obi-Wan wasn't the same way with Qui-Gon.
Obi-Wan was not the same way with Qui-Gon at all. But Qui-Gon was the same way with the Jedi Council, so maybe, it skipped a generation with Obi-Wan.
Right, and I think we've seen it with Darksiders before, and I know that Baylan and Shin, they're not Sith.
Right.
But you see that sort of fear-based, obedient relationship with Maul and Sidious, Dooku and Sidious, whether or not Dooku was secretly planning stuff underneath them or not.
Right. Even like Kylo and Snoke, you can tell there's an element of fear there. Kylo could probably take Snoke, or could he? I don't know. He seems really powerful. There's that level of fear between the master and the apprentice that keeps the apprentice in check.
Yeah. I think Shin, I feel like despite her lack of dialogue, she doesn't say much, but she says so much with her body language and, her actions. I feel like she's a really conflicted person. On one hand, she's really obedient to Baylan. On the other hand, she starts to question him towards the end.
She does. Yeah.
Thrawn is like, like, well, you're gonna go kill Ezra and Sabine as soon as they meet up with each other. But, you know, in her mind, she's like, but you promised her that, you know, you'd give them the opportunity.
Yeah, and he also said no harm would come to her. He gave her his word, and the closer that Baylan got to his goal, whatever his goal was, the less his words seemed to matter to him.
Yeah.
And I felt like that really bothered Shin.
Yeah, I agree. I really liked Hera.
Yes, she was fantastic.
Yeah, I wasn't sure at first. The eyes were a little off-putting.
There's a lot of that, I think, in like modern Star Wars, is the eyes.
Yeah.
Like, they use these weird contacts, or I don't know if it's CG, and it's a little jarring at first.
You get used to it, but I think they try to replicate the kind of the brightness that the eyes have, especially in Rebels, where her eyes are super, super, are they green or blue?
They're very, very green, I think, if I'm remembering rightly, yeah.
In Rebels, and I think they try to replicate that, and obviously when you get into live action, it's just a little jarring, but I was able to get past it pretty easily. I think Mary Elizabeth Winstead did a great job. She's very motherly, which obviously Hera is the mom of the Rebels.
She's the mom of everyone. She mums everyone. Like that guy who runs the Corellian shipyard, she straight up mums him. Like, you can't declassify this. Oh, try me. You want to bet? Hera is just everyone's mum. And I thought it was really interesting seeing her like toe the line between following her orders and following her instincts. She's pretty out there, even in Rebels. Like, she follows orders when the rebellion is helping her out, you know? But as soon as it comes down to the rebellion aren't doing anything for Lothal anymore, but I really care about Ezra, so I'm gonna do this. As soon as I don't want to say as soon as it's convenient for her, she breaks rank. But she has a limit, you know? She's the most level-headed person in the room to a point.
Yeah.
But if she sees no point in following orders, she's going to go out there and she's going to do what she thinks right. And I think that's really important.
I think a lot of that stems from that conversation that she had with Kanan, where Kanan said, I'm not ready to join another war. And then she's basically like, well, this is the only way to get what we want in freeing Lothal. And so she goes and she makes everybody join the rebellion. But like you said, she's not afraid to break away when it comes to her family, which she always sees as coming first.
She signs her whole family up for rebel camp and she just drags them all along into the military. In Rebels, she's such a point of support for like every character in the show. I think every character has their mum talk with Hera, and she talks them round and she tells them what they need to hear. And she does the same thing here. She has scenes with Ahsoka. She has scenes with Sabine, where she's just like, I know you're frustrated. You've got to keep going.
She's really good at that. And Chopper.
Oh, Chopper was just perfect. I'm convinced that we just speak Chopper now, because it's like that moment with Groot in Guardians of the Galaxy where suddenly like, wait, hang on. Do I speak this character's language? I understand him now.
So we're part of the family now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot easier to understand him in live action. I don't know if that was on purpose or if we're just very used to Chopper talk by now.
Right.
But yeah, I loved, why can't we drop this ship on the city? Who cares?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All Imperials anyway.
Yeah, just shoot it down. Oh, I can't shoot it down. It'll crash in the city. So? Did you go through my stuff? Oh, I absolutely loved it. Like, obviously, we've seen Chopper in live action before, but this is like his most prominent appearance, and I absolutely loved it. I was here for every minute of that crazy little murder droid. There's a reason why he's my favorite, and I'm pretty sure we've seen it in just his brief, fleeting appearances in this series.
Yeah, but I have to say, I don't think there's anyone that embodied their character as well as Sabine.
Oh, absolutely.
She was so good. Immediately from the first scene, it was like, yeah, that's Sabine.
That's
from Rebels.
Sabine. Yeah, it's this animated character that I've known for years, except she's just older now. Like, this is what Sabine is like as a grown-up. She's got that absolute streak of attitude. I think like every single one of her lines in the first episode starts with like a really long, well, like, and yet that's Sabine. That's Sabine in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see the first time we've ever seen her with long hair. And the reason she has short hair is because of her helmet, so it just goes to show how long it's been since she's put the helmet on.
Right.
Probably since the end of the Civil War.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think that really ties into the message that Ezra leaves her, because he's just like, I know you're going to keep on fighting, but I don't think that she did. I don't think she did keep fighting. I think she took Ezra's original message, the one where he said, I'm counting on you, and just went, oh, he means I have to look after Lothal. So she probably didn't get involved involved at Endor. Like, she thinks that Endor was the end of the war, so she definitely didn't get involved in Jakku. And we know that Hera was there for pretty much every beat of the Galactic Civil War. She was at Scarif, she was at Endor. She's there all the way right up to Exegol. If there's a fight going on, Hera's taken the ghost.
Yeah, and according to Hu Yang, Ahsoka dumped her as an apprentice either shortly before or shortly after the Purge of Mandalore, which happened prior to the Battle of Endor, so I think you're right. I think she maybe participated and trained with Ahsoka up until that point. And then when Ahsoka dumped her, she just said, okay, forget this, I'm gonna go look after Lothal like I promised Ezra I would.
Right.
And then she just never left. She kind of gave up.
Yeah, and there's an element of, like, it's not a bad thing that she stayed on Lothal, but I feel like she used it as an excuse to not get involved. Like, she always seems to have a reason why she can't do something. Oh, I can't get involved in the Galactic Civil War because I promised Ezra I'd look after Lothal, or oh, I can't wield the Darksaber because it's this ancient artifact that belongs in the hands of a Mandalorian Jedi or a great leader. Or I can't train as a Jedi because Ahsoka doesn't want to teach me anymore. She's always got this reason why she can't do something. It's so tragic seeing her like that, you know?
I think her finally just saying, okay, now I'm ready. She cuts her hair. She reaches out to Ahsoka, which was probably a huge step for her because we know how stubborn she is. She never wants to be the first person to reach out or do anything.
Especially if there's an apology involved. Like, she's never the one to apologize first.
Yeah, exactly. So it was a huge step for her to reach out to Ahsoka and say, okay, now I'm ready. And it was cool to see that transition from sulking and probably reasonably depressed. You lost her entire family, her friends, and everything.
But essentially hiding in Ezra's old pad, feeding her cat.
Speaking of, I really want to love the cat.
I would love that.
It's so cute.
Like, I would love it. Dog's looking at us weird. We can't talk about the cat. Yeah, I think the thing that we forget about with Sabine is she lost absolutely everything in the war. Like, she lost her family, she lost her friends, and when the war was over and everybody went home, she had no one to go home to. Like, Hera goes off with the New Republic.
So does Zeb.
So does Zeb, you know, where he's bouncing backwards and forwards between the New Republic and Lyra-san or whatever, hanging out with Callus with all the other Lasat.
In her eyes, she was abandoned by Ahsoka.
Yeah, Ahsoka left her behind because, well, Ahsoka was dealing with her own things, but Sabine doesn't know that. Ahsoka's not going to tell her, hey, look, I'm not going to train you, here's the reason. She probably just said, I can't do this, and walked out, because that's how she is, you know? And I think we forget about that. So when we do meet up with her again in that first episode, it's so sad. It's so sad seeing her like that. Like, seeing her almost like we see Kenobi at the start of the Kenobi series, like definitely how we see Luke at the start of Last Jedi. Like, someone who's just done.
Defeated.
They're absolutely broken. And, you know, she's filled with so much resentment for pretty much everybody around her. Like, authority. She blows off Clancy Brown when he's trying to throw her a nice award ceremony, and
I think that tied in pretty well with her character at the time, though. I don't think she felt like she deserved that,
right?
Because in her eyes, she's not the one who saved Lothal; it was Ezra,
right?
And she didn't, she wasn't a war hero, and she presumably left the rebels before the end of everything.
And I get the impression that she probably didn't paint that mural so it would be a war monument. She probably painted it so she could remember a better time when she had her family around, her adopted family, and I guess she's probably not a fan of the commercialization of her artwork. Which, by the way, that was something they handled really, really well, was the art stuff. Like, having Ahsoka go to Sabine because Sabine understands artwork and ancient cultures, and of course she's able to solve the bloody map, like, immediately.
And I don't think that's out of character for her either, because, you know, even in the World Between Worlds episodes, she solves that Mortis God's mural.
Like, immediately.
Before that old guy who'd been studying it for weeks,
right?
You know, and he's like, what the this is ridiculous.
How did you figure it out? And she's just like, oh, I'm smarter than you.
Yeah.
It comes up quite a lot in Rebels that she's not the most open member of the Ghost. She's very bullish and stubborn and cagey, and we kind of see that come back towards the end of the series when they do find Ezra, and she's immediately filled with, like, regret at how she got there. Like, all of a sudden, like, she gets over the rush of finding him, like, yeah, I got what I wanted. Oh my god, what have I done? Like, it all comes rushing, and I don't think she's ready to admit that to herself, or especially not to Ezra. Like, she's not ready to say, hey, that thing that you did to save Lothal and basically the galaxy, because
I just undid that.
I just undid all of that because I wanted to find you. I undid it for an incredibly selfish reason.
Yeah.
But it's an absolutely exceptional characterization of her. I almost wish we could have seen her in full armor a little bit more. Maybe I've just been spoiled by The Mandalorian, like seeing like really cool Beskar armor all the time. But let's face it, it's Sabine. She takes a helmet off all the time, because how is she supposed to show off her hair if she's got a helmet on?
Yeah.
So that seems like a pretty logical point to transition into talking about Ezra. I think it's fair to say neither of our favorite character from Rebels.
I hated Ezra.
You did hate Ezra, and I'm deeply conflicted about Ezra because I dislike him too for a long time. And it's possible to dislike a character while still enjoying them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But there are moments in Rebels where he says things and he does things that are so selfish and so immature. Like all the way through season 3 when they're with the Rebel Alliance and they're trying to help the whole galaxy, and every meeting he's like, what about Lothal? Or his absolute killer line from the Darksaber episode.
Oh god, I wanted to punch him in his stupid face.
Oh, yeah, Sabine's finally opening up about her family, and all he can think to say as well,
At least you have parents.
at least you've got a family to go back to. What a terrible thing to say. But with that being said, I don't know when it happens. I think it happens around the time that Kanan dies, and definitely by the end of the series, he suddenly becomes a character that I care about, because when he's on the bridge of the Chimera and he's taking it into hyperspace, I'm in tears, man, like every single time. And it's the same here. When Sabine finds him and they hug and the music swells and it's that great Rebels score again, I break apart, man. It's such a good moment. When did I start caring about this guy?
I think I held out hope until, honestly, until episode 8 rolled around, that he was gonna be maybe just a little bit dark side. I had a little theory that I wrote down after episode 7, when he refused to take Sabine's lightsaber, which obviously we know he saw it as belonging to her now.
Right.
But in my mind, I was like, oh, maybe he went a little dark side to get away from Thrawn. Like, it was speculated that his chainmail was made out of stormtrooper tags, which I don't know if those have ever been a thing in canon.
I don't think that's...
It was a rumor going around on the internet, and I was like, well, maybe he went a little dark side, and...
Even just in, like, a way that Seer did when she got away from the Inquisitorius, like, just a moment of it.
Yeah, and he was using this time to reconnect with the Force, and he was afraid to wield a lightsaber he was afraid that maybe that would bring out the, I don't know, dark side back out of him, but obviously then immediately in episode 8, he's reconstructing a lightsaber. I was like, oh, never mind, I guess he is permanently light side, and I guess that's fine. We did have his little, dabble in the dark side in seasons 3 and a little bit of season 4 of Rebels, but...
And I always thought that was a really good arc for him, because you hear in Empire Strikes Back, like, literally the second Star Wars movie ever is just like, oh yeah, the moment that you start down that path, you're stuck on it forever. Well, Ezra started down that path. He was using the Sith holocron, he was working with Maul, who's effectively his dark side dealer, this skinny guy that kept showing up and saying, hey, let's go do some evil stuff. But he recognized that anytime he worked with Maul, it hurt his friends and his family, and so he turned back. He made the better choice. He broke his addiction with the dark side, if you like, and he turned back. And while I would have liked to explore it a little bit more, I also love Space Moses Ezra. He's so cool. Like, he's become so powerful by the time Sabine finds it. He's fighting with his bare hands and he's throwing stormtroopers all over. Kanan would be so proud of him.
And I think Shin was so shook
Oh, yeah.
when he stopped her lightsaber with his bare hands. She was, obviously we saw how excited she was to fight Sabine up until the moment she found out that Sabine couldn't use the Force, and then
Right.
she was immediately discarded her as an opponent.
Because we can just assume that everybody that Shin had faced up until that point has just been some guy with a gun who she can just hack up. The moment Sabine sparks that lightsaber up, there's this look of glee on her face where she's like, finally!
Finally, a real opponent.
Yeah.
And then she fights with Ezra, and I think she realizes in that moment that, oh, okay, maybe I'm not as good as I thought that I was.
Right, this scruffy, beardy man has just stopped my lightsaber with his hands. And I think that's actually, like, can I just say, I think stopping the lightsaber with the Force is one of my new favorite things that we've started seeing. Like, we saw it in Rise of Skywalker, we saw it in Kenobi. It's just this new thing that they've started doing, and I absolutely love it every time it happens.
It is pretty cool, but I really think that seeing him in kind of, I think, at his prime now, because the last time we saw him, he was a teenager. Now we're seeing a full, not necessarily master, but definitely at this point, Jedi Knight.
He would have been a Jedi Knight by now, I would have thought.
It was great to see him, especially in live action, in his prime.
Right.
He looked great. The actor was great. All around, I thought it was really well done.
And he's using the Force for knowledge and defense. Like that's how a Jedi is supposed to use the Force. He's figured it out all by himself. Because I think it's fair to say he used the Force in some pretty inventive ways in Rebels.
First person to ever use a blaster saber.
Right, the blaster saber, like walking that ATDP off the landing pad. I know that was dark side stuff. That was mostly dark side stuff. That was definitely like the holocron, like nudging him, saying, "Hey, you should try this."
So kind of going from Ezra, who I think really grew and thrived, on Paradia. Thrawn, on the other hand, I think just kind of stewed in his resentment the entire time. I don't think it took anything away from his character. He's still as badass as always, but I think he's now very singular focused. I'm not gonna let these goddamn kids ruin my life again. Like, get these coffins on my starship and we'll just leave them in the desert. Let's go.
Yeah, that moment where he's talking to Morgan and he's just like, even I have fallen victim to a single Jedi. Never again. Like, I absolutely love that moment. And yeah, Thrawn is my absolute favorite character of all time. Like, in anything, he's probably my favorite fictional character, let alone Star Wars. And it was an absolute dream come true seeing him on screen in live action. And I mean that in the most literal sense, because I told you about the dream that I had where I got invited up to the International Space Station for the premiere of Thrawn, a Star Wars story starring Lars Mikkelsen. And when I tell you, he looked exactly the same. He sounded exactly the same. So when I say that seeing Lars play Thrawn in live action was a dream come true, I mean it in the most literal sense.
Yeah, and again, I think eyes were a bit jarring, but I don't know how you can make red eyes look natural, so I think they did the best that they could.
Though the eyes really grew on me, and I think what it was is, I've read for like 20 years how this guy has got glowing red eyes, and then he comes to Rebels, and his eyes aren't glowing. They're just red. And that was fine, and that's been my Thrawn for the last few years. So actually seeing him have glowing eyes was really jarring. But I think it took me maybe an episode to get used to it, and then after that it was just perfect. Like, that's my guy.
I'm not a fan of the wig, though.
You think it's a wig?
Oh, it's definitely a wig.
Oh.
Almost all of their hair is wigs.
Oh, you think so?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But obviously we knew he was coming, and he may not be in a lot of the series. He's only in like the last 3 episodes, but his presence is just all through this series. Like, anytime his name is mentioned and you just see the look of fear on people's faces, you hear that incredibly familiar theme tune just like quietly playing in the background. He's a big deal.
Yeah, and I think it really goes to show, like, when the Night Troopers first showed up on screen, you and I didn't know if they were dead or if they were alive, but then in episode 8 we figure out, oh, these guys are still alive.
Yeah.
And they were just chanting his name because they just respect him that much.
That goes a lot to show how he is as a leader. Like, these guys, they worship him. He treats them with such respect. He doesn't waste their lives. There's a great parallel in, I believe it's episode 7, when Ahsoka goes into the debris field and the fighters go after her, and Thrawn's just like, call them back. There's no need to waste our resources. And then you remember Empire Strikes Back, when the Falcon goes into the asteroid field and Vader sends all of Death Squadron after him. He sends Star Destroyers, bombers, TIE fighters. There's a Star Destroyer that I'm pretty sure gets destroyed in the asteroid field because he's so determined to go out, and he just throws troopers at the problem until the problem is solved or he runs out of troopers. Whereas Thrawn is just like, you know what? This isn't going our way. This isn't our day. Pull them back. We'll get them next time.
I think that's really in line with how he was in Rebels as well, because he never went out of his way to win a battle that he didn't think was necessary to win.
Right.
Like on Ryloth, he let them have that win after Hera blew up her home.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, they've won this one. They're not going to win the war, so it doesn't matter if they win the battle.
The bit with Callus as well, after the infiltrator droid blows up one of his ships, and Callus is like, oh, you seem in surprisingly good spirits considering we just lost. He's like, yeah, but I've just narrowed narrowed down by about 9,000 worlds which one they're hiding on.
It's like he always finds a way to come out on top.
He really does. He sees the bigger picture. Like, even when he loses the battle, he's gonna win the war. He's like, he's absolutely certain. And how great was it to get to see the Chimera on screen? Like, for the first time in live action. Like, my favorite Star Destroyer.
It was a little worse for wear.
Oh, it's seen some better days, but you gotta remember, I was going into this thinking that I was gonna see my favorite Star Destroyer just, like, dashed against a mountain or something, or, like, cannibalized into some kind of headquarters, because the last time we saw it, it was just getting ripped into hyperspace. So something that I talked about in our predictions video was, which version of Thrawn are we gonna get? Because there are clearly two distinctive versions of him. There's the version that we see on screen in Rebels, and then there is the more complex and deeper version of him that we see in the books. And sometimes it seems like every time Thrawn does something terrible on screen, Timothy Zahn is there to quickly write a book 6 months later to explain why he had to do it, why he had no choice. And I think it's important to clarify, because there's a very big misconception in the fan base that Thrawn's not a villain. He absolutely is. He is absolutely a villain. Like, he's a villain with clearly outlined and maybe even understandable motivation, but the things that he does are terrible. Like, even in the books, he does some terrible things. He crashes a ship into a bridge and sucks its crew out into space. You know, he bombs civilians in Rebels. And, you know, every time he does something like that, there's always a rationale behind it, but it doesn't deteriorate the fact that it is a terrible villainous thing to do. And I'm in the middle at the moment. I don't know which version we're seeing. A part of me wants to say, yeah, it's just the straight by the numbers bad guy that we're seeing, and I'm okay with that. I love it when Thrawn's just a bad guy, but maybe there's something else going on. Like, he talks to Morgan about being about the Empire, being about the defense of the galaxy. Like, defending against what? Like, what's going on? What's his motivation here? Because he's been gone for a long time. Like, his whole species could have been wiped out by now. He wasn't there to protect them. They could be all gone. The Ascendancy could just be gone. We don't know. He's been gone for a long time. So I don't know. What kind of read do you get on his motivations at the moment?
Honestly, I don't know, because he never really struck me as 100% long live the Empire kind of guy.
Right.
That was very much so Tarkin, Pride, you know, these other high-ranking Empire officials, but he always had his own personal motivations for the Chiss and the Ascendancy, so seeing him very long live the Empire, I don't know, it didn't rub me the wrong way, but
It's a little jarring.
I feel like maybe because he's had so long by himself on this planet, well, obviously with the troopers that he has left.
His army of fanatical stormtroopers.
I don't know. I just feel like maybe, I don't know if it's radicalized him in a certain direction or if he's just, I don't know.
I mean, my rationale for it has kind of been, it's not necessarily about the Empire as he knew it. Like, it's not about Palpatine. It's not about Vader. It's not about ruling the galaxy. It's about a secure and reliable system of defense. Like, he said on a number of occasions, he may not agree with a lot of the Empire's decisions, particularly ones surrounding a certain moon-sized orb that blows up planets, but he respects the infrastructure, and he recognizes, like, even between the Empire and the Republic, he recognized that the Republic was not going to be a viable ally to form with the Chiss Ascendancy, but he saw that ally in the Empire, and I don't think he sees it in necessarily the people who were running the Empire. In fact, you get the impression sometimes he doesn't even like the people that he works for. Palpatine in particular, I don't think he liked Palpatine very much.
I think one line that sticks out to me from Rebels in particular, I don't know if it's the exact line, but I always return results for my Emperor. Part of that always kind of, it felt a little double-sided, like, this fucking guy, like, you know, I'll do what I have to do for this guy, but I don't know. So I think now that it's just him, when he said long live the Empire, part of me thinks, okay, well maybe he's more along the lines of long live my Empire,
Long live
because
me.
I'm gonna rule this shit now.
I can now run this Empire the way I want to run it. I can build TIE defenders out the yin-yang instead of trying to build some massive super weapon. Little does he know, obviously, that Starkiller Base is out there somewhere, and that would probably drive him crazy.
Well, obviously he has to know about the Shadow Council. Well, actually, we don't know how much communication he's had with Morgan, if it was just through the sisters.
Right.
And just in her dreams, and he probably isn't really super up to date about the state of the Empire.
Yeah, I mean,
So
the only real clue we have on that is that Pelion knew he was coming back, which meant that either Pelion was in communication with Morgan and knew roughly what the timeline looked like, or maybe something else was going on there. That's my most, like, viable option, is that Pelion was in communication with Morgan, and Morgan was like, yeah, this is going to go down pretty soon. He's coming back.
I think that was one question I answered for myself as the show progressed. I was like, why did they wait so long? Like, if she knew that he was gonna, if he was still alive or whatever. Obviously, we don't know when the mothers reached out to Morgan, and at that point, it could have been after the Empire had already fallen, and then it's like, how do you sneak all of these giant hyperspace engines out of New Republic fields? So I imagine it took time.
Yeah, we also don't know how long the Eye of Sion took to build. It was pretty big.
It's huge, yeah. You don't really understand the scale of it when you see it outside of Cetos, but when it comes out of the sky on Peridia and it just kind of clips onto the Chimera, it kind of dwarfs the Chimera.
It does really, a little bit, yeah.
It shows you how freaking big this thing is. I imagine it took a long time to build.
Yeah, and it's easy to build stuff when you're a galactic dictatorship and you can do whatever you want, but when you're trying to smuggle parts out of the new government to build this thing, it probably slowed the process down a lot.
Yeah, so for anyone else who was like me asking, why did it freaking take so long? Why are we only now just getting to it? So, you know, it takes time to steal parts and build giant space rings.
And that feels like a pretty natural transition to talk about the New Republic for a bit, because we got a lot of New Republic stuff in this, and I got exactly what I wanted out of it. Like, these are the good guys, right? These are the guys who won the last war. They've got their peace.
Or are they?
And and they are just sucking so hard at running the galaxy. Like, how are they doing such a bad job? I mean, obviously, diplomacy and democracy takes a long time, and they're kind of propping themselves up with, like, ex-Imperials and an infrastructure that they would probably rather not work with. But even though you feel like people like Mon Mothma and Hera and Leia in particular, you know they're doing their best, but the system is just failing, and I feel like it's so important for us to see that, like, to see that the New Republic was so bad at its job, so we can kind of understand why it was so easy for the First Order to just wipe them out.
And I think a lot of that comes from the fact that the original Republic from prequel movies had a lot of flaws. There was tons of corruption. You know, in that sense, Palpatine was right. I mean, obviously he was able to stay in power for, 15 years longer than he was supposed to.
Right.
Even before he created the Empire. And it's just, all of these flaws were in the Republic, so when they took over the Empire, they just kind of rebuilt the existing structure without fixing any of the flaws. And on top of those existing flaws from the original Republic, now you've got the added layer of all of these Imperials who are still loyal to the Empire, but I don't want to be arrested, so I'm just going to chill here and see how this goes for a while.
Yeah.
See if this is going to work in my favor. You don't know.
Oh, we can get to him.
But, you know, it's just, they didn't fix any of the foundational issues from the original Republic. And obviously, you don't have a lot of original senators.
Right.
You had Mon Mothma, who became Chancellor, but Leia wasn't born, you know, she was born on Empire Day.
Right.
You know, so even though she's, you know, a powerful figure in the New Republic, you know, she didn't know what the original Republic was like. So they're all just going off of this original theoretical model that many of them haven't experienced.
It's like an idealized memory of what democracy was like before the Empire.
Right, and it wasn't functional then either. So it just compounds all of the issues that they were having, which whether or not the First Order coming in is gradual or whatever, which it wasn't, you know, which is pointed out in Resistance and all of that.
Yeah, it was going on for a long time, and the New Republic was just like, we don't want to know.
Yeah, just, you know, it's fine, it's happening over there, you know, it's outer rim, who cares?
And I feel like in the ways that we've been introduced to the New Republic in the years since we saw them get blown up, it's been kind of gradual. Like, when they're first talked about in Mandalorian, they just seem like they're too busy for the outer rim, and you can kind of see that. You know, it's a new government, they're taking over a massive amount of space. Sure, they're not going to have time to do everything. But then as Mandalorian went on, you saw more and more of like, oh, this isn't just we're busy, this is deliberate neglect. Like, they're deliberately not doing this, and they're doing some pretty shady stuff with like former Imperial reconditioning, you know, with patronizing quotation marks
the
around
mind
it.
flare, yeah.
Oh yeah, the mind flare. We're still using that. I don't know, it's just, you get the image of this government that's built with the best intentions, and I'm not trying to take that away from them. And in terms of being a democracy, yes, they are 1,000 times better than the Empire, but they're so much less efficient. They're kind of paralyzed by procedure and protocol and court hearings and obviously corrupt senators.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Senator Ziono for a minute? I think my single greatest regret in all of Star Wars as a narrative is that guy wasn't on Hosnian Prime when it blew up.
Which, to me, is just as suspicious.
Yeah, absolutely.
Planet, but he just so happens to not be there.
When the rest of the Senate is there.
Exactly.
No, I'm sorry, man. And then when we find out that he survived and he's reaching out to contact Kaz, he's not saying, oh, they destroyed my home. I've been galvanized into activism. No, he's saying, no, stay away from them. Stay away from them. They're gonna take out everyone who's involved with the resistance. The guy's dirty. I'm sorry. The guy is 100% dirty.
Even Hera points it out. She's like, did you get involved, or you were just waiting to see who came out on top?
Oh, yeah, and that
Absolutely.
really burned him.
Yeah.
You can tell that burned him. The guy just has, born into money, never had to fight for anything.
Nepo baby.
Absolutely. And I think Kaz does kind of confirm that his family is incredibly wealthy, and yet he wants to make his own way. He was a pilot in the New Republic. He joined the Resistance when that was kicking off, and that I think is really good. What we're starting to see is, particularly with Hera, when she's going against the New Republic, when they're not serving the best interests of themselves. Eventually we see Leia do exactly that when the New Republic yet again doesn't want to get involved with the First Order, doesn't want to start another war. She's just like, oh, sod this, I'm gonna go start another rebellion. I'll do it for you. And it ends up saving her life, because she absolutely would have been on Hosnian Prime otherwise.
Yeah, but I think just kind of bringing it back around, I think Ahsoka really just highlights all of the issues of the New Republic, puts it under a microscope. I think it really ties in well with the other parts of the franchise that maybe necessarily didn't have a lot of fleshing out originally. So yeah, it really worked for me. Yeah. I liked it.
There's definitely something to be said for the fact that the moment we're introduced to the New Republic, it's when it's blowing up. We got nothing. There was a bit of it in the books beforehand, and you kind of got this impression of a government that didn't really work properly, but it's really good to see it actually fleshed out and explored, and it really illustrates, it was an absolute tragedy that the New Republic was destroyed, but in a lot of ways, maybe they deserved it. Maybe they deserved a bit of a kicking.
Sorry for the pause. Little man has demanded a cuddle. He's joining the podcast now, so if you hear any huffs or groans, it's just little Teebo.
Sometimes I think we really should have called him Chopper. So moving on from just characters and characterization to the actual the plot of the series, how do you think it landed in terms of storytelling? Before we get into the issues that we have with structure and whatnot, let's just talk about the story itself.
Just the story itself. I enjoyed it. It was a good time.
Yeah.
I'll wait to say more when we get to the gripey bit, so you can go ahead and and say what you enjoyed about it.
I definitely appreciated that it felt very serialized. Each episode led logically into the next one, because Mandalorian has times where it feels very episodic, and there's nothing wrong with that. Clone Wars is episodic, but everybody forgets about that when they're griping about one-off episodes in Mandalorian.
Ahsoka is kind of their way of moving away, I think, from the episodic nature of The Mandalorian, because in The Mandalorian, season 1 specifically, they had no idea if live action was going to work for these shows or these stories. They didn't know how well they were going to do. They didn't immediately approve a season 2.
No.
They had no idea what it was going to be like, so they just did start, end, complete story, 1 or 2 episode arcs.
Yeah.
And that worked for them. It worked in the Clone Wars. And I think they kind of explored it a little bit with Obi-Wan. They did a more
linear story.
Linear story instead of episodic. So I think they definitely tried to do that here as well.
But Mando season 2, for instance, that felt very deliberate. Each episode was we gotta go here, so we go here, and then that's the next episode. And one episode leads into the next. You gotta go find Ahsoka Tano. I go find Ahsoka Tano. You gotta go to Tython. I'm going to Tython. Each episode sets up the next one. And this one too feels very deliberately like that. Each episode moves into the next one, and it builds on what came before it. And I think my only real issue with the storytelling is similarly to to Mando Season 1, sometimes I wish the episodes knew how short they were.
Yeah.
There's that episode in Mando Season 1 where we hear Queel talk about how he rebuilt IG-11.
For like 11 minutes.
For like 11 minutes.
So long.
It goes on for so long, and you just like, Queel, come on, move it along, man. This episode's nearly over. And I felt like that a couple of times in this. Like, there were times when it really worked for when Sabine was trying to figure out how to open the map. Like, that didn't bother me at all. But I felt like some scenes, they felt a little stretched out, and it was just someone hanging out for a bit, thinking, you know, and you're like, this is a 40-minute episode. Can we move this along, please?
Yeah, I either need hour-long episodes or I need 12-episode seasons.
Yeah.
This whole 30 minutes, 8 episodes, it doesn't work for me.
Right. And I mean, there's a lot to be said about the fact that all of Clone Wars, all of Rebels, with the exception of like special episodes, and all of Bad Batch as well, again, with that exception, they're all 20-minute episodes. So it is possible to tell these stories in that time, but look at how much bigger those seasons are.
But on the other hand, you don't have a lot of one-episode arcs in those shows. A lot of at a minimum 2 episodes.
Right.
Most of them are 3 to 4 episodes, so you're still getting
like a
40
40-minute
minutes,
story.
yeah, for this story, which I feel like this show really needed. But plot-wise, just kind of bringing it back to the positives of the plot, I really felt that the characters were well-rounded. None of them fell flat to me.
No.
They all sort of had their little arcs. Some of them had very large arcs, like Sabine. Yeah, all of that worked for me.
Yeah, I was very, very satisfied with the story, like what the story was, like the themes that they challenged, and, you know, the different arcs for the different characters. Because when you make the decision to bring characters whose story is technically finished back, you have to give them a new arc. You've got to give them a new journey to go on, something new that they have to overcome. You know, they did it with, much to my surprise, and as much as I didn't want it to happen, they brought back Boba Fett, and they gave him a story. They gave him an arc to go through, and that's why now I like Boba Fett. You know, we're friends now.
Can we just talk about how amazing episode 5 was?
It was so good.
So good. That was the peak of the entire show for me. If we had had more of episode 5, it would have been just phenomenal. I think we got so much character growth for Ahsoka in that episode. And it was, you know, she's challenging her past, and she's coming to realize, okay, I was a literal child when all of my friends around me were dying.
Right.
You know, and they died because of my actions, because of what I told them to do. And she has to kind of overcome almost like this PTSD in a sense, where she's really restricting herself and honestly her connection to the Force, I think, was probably affected by that. Because just end of episode 4 Ahsoka and beginning of episode 6 Ahsoka are like two completely different characters.
They're not the same person at all. Episode 5 is 100% the climax of Ahsoka's arc in this series, I think. Like, that's when she's on the verge of just, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. You know, I just got my butt handed to me by Ray Stevenson. You know?
And especially, like, where she has that flash of the dark side in season 4, where she throws Shin against that rock because she thinks that Sabine is dead. And she, in that moment, is succumbed to her attachment to Sabine.
Yeah.
And then I think she kind of, honestly, I think that's why Baylan was able to get the upper hand, because she was so taken aback when Sabine finally did show up from the forest, and she was just like, oh no, what have I done?
It completely threw her off balance, and and Baylan saw that and went straight for it.
Yeah, immediately. And episode 5 was her facing her own dark side. You know, we got that with that awesome scene where her eyes turned Sith, and people could say it was just the I'm sorry, but no lighting in shows is an accident. It's 100% intentional.
Right.
Very powerful.
And I feel like that's why Anakin reached out to her in that moment, because he says right there, you know, she's like, I don't remember what happened. He's like, you lost a fight. And she's like, I never lose. And he said, trust me, you lost.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, you didn't lose because you were killed. You lost because you lost control. Yeah. Like, you dipped into something that you shouldn't have. And Anakin felt that and was like, I gotta talk to my apprentice. Like, I gotta get through to her. And he runs her through, I mean, I think we can safely assume, runs her through the entire bloody Clone Wars. Like, maybe she was jumping from battle to battle, but I got the sense we saw her at the start and we saw her at the end. I could believe she went through the whole thing. Like, one battle at a time. And how jarring was it seeing an age-appropriate actor playing Ahsoka from the Clone Wars?
Literal child.
It blew my mind. Like, I feel like that's something we don't really feel in the Clone Wars, especially in, like, the mid-seasons and, like, towards the end, because Ashley Eckstein is an adult.
Yeah.
She's an adult voicing a child. So this child has a maturity to her voice, and she's speaking dialogue that maybe a 14-year-old wouldn't say because she's being written by adults.
Right.
Seeing her as a literal child in the middle of a battle was insane to me. And it kind of makes you, like, grind your teeth at the Jedi Order a little bit more. Like, come on, guys.
Like, how is nobody seeing something wrong with this?
Right. She's that age. I think we can safely assume maybe Barriss is the same age. So no wonder she went off the rails,
Right.
you know?
Yeah.
We're talking about literal teenagers in their formative years and spending those formative years on the battlefield.
Child soldiers.
Yeah, surrounded by clones just dropping by the hundreds.
Yeah.
You know? It's got to be very traumatizing, and it plays a lot into Ahsoka's conflict with her identity. She's like, I'm supposed to be a peacekeeper, but I was raised as a soldier. I'm raised as a general. And Anakin kind of has to reiterate the lesson, like,
Raised as a commander.
Ah.
Sorry.
You threw me off my stride now.
Sorry.
And Anakin has to kind of reiterate the lesson that he's not just training her to be a weapon, he's training her to be a leader. He's training her to survive. And that's the message that maybe got lost in Ahsoka's fear of ending up just like, as we see it on screen. Like, we see her watch him walk into the fog, and there's that flash of explosion, and he turns into Vader.
Yeah.
And it's so, so beautiful. I love that shot so much.
I just want more of Hayden Christensen as Anakin and Vader.
We don't deserve Hayden Christensen as Anakin.
I know. Hey, I've always loved Hayden Christensen as Anakin.
Me
Thank
too.
you very much.
I've been there the whole time. Like, I'm not one of these people that, ripped on it at the time and has now conveniently changed my mind now that other movies have come out.
I don't know how old I was when Attack of the Clones came out. When did it come out? 2002?
2002,
I
yeah.
was 7. I went to see it in the theaters and I was absolutely in love. I know everyone hates that movie, but
No,
I
I
love
like-
them all. The prequels are my favorite.
The prequels are fantastic. They're all great movies, and I enjoy every single one of them. But it's interesting seeing Hayden play almost a cross between himself and Matt Lanter playing Anakin in the Clone Wars. Like, he has these moments of dialogue where you're like, oh, that's a Matt Lanter line. And some of them just straight are. Like, I
Yeah.
think there are scenes when they're playing the training recording. Those lines are straight out of Tales of the Jedi. That is a Matt Lanter Anakin line.
Yeah.
And you're hearing Hayden say it. It's so cool. So, kind of speaking of other Star Wars projects coming in, obviously a highlight of this series for me was the music. Having Kevin kind of come back from his work on Rebels and his work on Clone Wars, if there is to be a spiritual successor to John Williams when it comes to scoring Star Wars, I hope and pray that it's Kevin Kiner, because he understands Star Wars music so, so well. There are entire scenes in this series where there is no dialogue and it's just a person doing something, and the music is just the star of the show, 100%.
I also have to say, I love that we're now getting in-universe music.
Oh.
Like, we got The Who in the Jedi video games, and now we have this pop-punk female band for Sabine. It was so good. I hope we get that in some sort of MP3 that I can download
Release an album for it. Like,
Yeah,
there's
absolutely.
even, like, in Rebels, I think there's a scene where Zeb is just, like, sitting on Athlon. He's just listening to, like, Star Wars rock music. And I love every time in-universe Star Wars music is just so, so cool. It's not all Figure and Dan, or Max Rebo. Like, sometimes there's some really alternative stuff.
Which is definitely more my speed, but yeah, I loved the punk music for Sabine. It was so fitting.
So I feel like now would be a good time to talk about some of our absolute standout moments from the series, like moments that just made us like so thrilled that this show got made. After you.
Mine was 100% Anakin and Ahsoka's fight, and specifically where her eyes turn yellow for a second, she throws his lightsaber away and says, "No, I'm choosing to live."
Yeah.
And I think people can argue all day it's the world between between worlds. I still don't think that it was. There were no gateways, there were no voices in the background.
We didn't see her enter, we didn't see her leave.
Right.
You know.
I think she was there because she's been to the world between worlds, but that was just how the Force was manifesting this sort of in-between state for her, because that's maybe how she views the other side as the world between worlds, because that was her experience. I think that was her moment to either become one with the Force or
to
say, no, I'm going to keep going. So yeah, definitely that whole episode, but that moment in particular where she decides, yeah, no, I'm gonna overcome this darkness that maybe I inherited from you.
Right.
And I'm gonna overcome it and be better.
Yeah. And she's really taking agency over her identity, you know, and throwing the lightsaber down, like that's straight from Luke, which straight from Luke, straight to Vader, straight to Anakin, straight to Ahsoka. Like he's trying to teach her that there are more ways to win than just killing the other guy. And we see her practice that in the very next episode when she fights Baylan again. It's just like, I don't have to beat you. I just have to get away from you. You know? I don't have to stand here and kill you. I don't have to overpower you because I need to be somewhere else right now. I just need to stop you from stopping me.
And that was, you know, we had seen it earlier in the show where she just gunned down Marrok without even a second thought.
Oh my god, we haven't even talked about Marrok. Okay, let's take a quick pause and just appreciate Marrok just being a guy.
Yeah.
Like, just being a random guy in a helmet.
I still think he was the eighth brother, but...
I support that theory, especially with the whole exploding in, like, green dust thing.
He was definitely dead.
With what we see later in the series, yeah, maybe it was the eighth brother and he was just reanimated, but what was your favourite crap Marrok theory?
That it was Barriss. First of all, obviously... It's a male character.
Right.
Second of all, Barriss is either dead or...
We hope so.
She was in Imperial custody at the time the Empire took over, so they either turned her into an Inquisitor or they killed her.
They just gunned her down in her cell.
They did not keep prisoners when it came to Jedi, but they made that very clear with Luminara. They used her fake body to lure in other Jedi, but they didn't keep Jedi prisoners unless they thought that they could turn them into Inquisitors.
Yeah.
So she's not alive anymore. She didn't escape.
And Marrok was clearly a dude.
Right. So that was... I liked seeing it because I thought it was hilariously stupid. But yeah, that was my favorite awful Marrok theory. What was yours?
I think my favorite, the most ridiculous one for me, it's like so ridiculous that I don't even consider it a favorite, was that he was going to be Ezra. Because that just made no sense whatsoever. Like, Ezra hated the Inquisitors. Like, every interaction he had with an Inquisitor either left him with a scar across his face, or like, he was super in deep with the dark side with Maul, when Maul's just cutting down the 7th and the 5th. Why would Ezra dress up as an Inquisitor? And that theory should have died the moment that Marrok crossed blades with Ahsoka.
Yeah.
That theory should have died right then and there, but then, mind control. Mind control. Maybe he's got one of those parasitic Geonosian worms in his nose. No, this just doesn't make any sense. But I think the most annoying one, the one that wouldn't die and wouldn't go away, it's the Starkiller thing. I mean, I've made it pretty clear in my videos, I'm not the biggest Starkiller fan, and you want to talk about overpowered characters in Star Wars, Starkiller is right up there. Like, yeah, you can make the argument that he was trained by Vader, you can make whatever rationalization you like. I don't think there's room for Starkiller in the canon anymore. Certainly not from a narrative point of view, like the stuff that he does in the games. That's all been done by somebody else now.
Honestly, Starkiller to me is a made-up character for people who wanted more content at a time where there was no more Star Wars content. They were pretty much endgame. Clone Wars was out, but there was no sign in sight that there was going to be any more additions to the Star Wars canon. So they were able to do whatever they wanted and kind of, here, you want a fun video game where you can fight Vader because everyone as a kid wants to fight Vader.
Yeah, a little bit of wish fulfillment, swing a lightsaber around.
Yeah, so they give you a strong character, here you go fight Vader, have fun. That's what Starkiller is to me. He's a fun character that you can play as a video game. It's for people who enjoy video games. He doesn't belong in the canon. He doesn't fit in canon.
Right.
There's no place for him at this point because it's just, like you said, way overpowered. Mm-hmm. But that's how I feel about it. I love Sam Witwer. I'll do anything I can to get Sam Witwer in live action, but not as Starkiller. Give him his own character.
Yeah, let him play somebody else. Yeah. But it doesn't matter matter. From the moment he's cast, he's playing Starkiller. He must be playing Starkiller.
Like, yes, he was in the credits. He was the voice, probably speaking to Morgan.
Right.
Because he's an incredible voice actor, and they use him for pretty much everything. He does Palpatine. Sometimes he does Maul.
He does a great job as Maul.
Right. He does the brother from the Mortis arc. He's an incredible voice actor with incredible range. Just because he's tagged in something doesn't mean he's going to be Starkiller or Maul or the brother.
Right.
Sometimes he's just a good voice actor doing a backup voice.
Just doing background voice stuff. So I think sometimes he's a stormtrooper. Like, sometimes he's just a stormtrooper.
Yeah, he showed up as a shore trooper in Andor.
Yeah, like, nobody was going, oh my god, Starkiller's a shore trooper? I really appreciated that we got this character as if there haven't been helmeted, masked characters in Star Wars before that haven't turned out to be some massive returning character. Phasma, yeah, she's just Phasma.
Yeah, then she just fell down a hole and that was it.
Yeah, and, Phasma was Phasma, Snoke was Snoke.
Yeah.
I'm glad we remembered to talk about that, because I'd forgotten about Marrok while we were talking about everything else.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to come back to that because I am so over theory crafting when it comes to these shows. It's fun, and it's fun for a minute, but the entire fan base out there thinking that they're MatPat or something and they're going to craft some intricate theory. Do you know who's wrong more than pretty much anybody? MatPat. But you know what he does when he's wrong?
He has fun with it.
He has fun with it. He says, you know what? I was wrong about it. He even opens videos sometimes where he's like, oh, I'm making another theory about this. I've got a great track record for being right about this. But you know what he doesn't do? He doesn't cry about wasted potential or nonsense like that. He doesn't think he's a better writer than the people writing the shows. And that's what I respect about him.
That's what bothers me about theory crafting is, coming up with theories is fun, but at the end of the day, I'm sorry, but you're not a better writer than the people who are currently writing Star Wars.
Right.
And you can say all day, the EU Legends, whatever. I'm sorry, but most of those books sucked, okay? I'm sorry, but they did. If they were nostalgic for you or whatever, that's fine, but the people who are writing Star Wars are approved by George Lucas. George Lucas gave Star Wars to Disney with the stipulation that Kathleen Kennedy be involved.
Right.
She's been his number 2
for absolutely years.
Forever.
She worked with Lucas, she worked with Spielberg, she's worked with some of the biggest directors in Hollywood.
And it may not always make sense when it first comes out, but eventually it'll all get flushed out. It'll all make sense, just like the prequels. Everyone hated those when they came out. People still hate them, but now that we have the Clone Wars and everything else, there's a resurgence of love for them.
Right.
So you just have to be patient when you have a franchise that is as big as Star Wars is. I don't think there's a franchise that's ever been this big. I mean, the MCU is trying, but it's nothing compared to Star Wars, except for maybe Doctor Who.
Yeah, I don't think the MCU is going to have the same kind of staying power.
No.
Like, it's already kind of feels like it's running out of steam.
Exhausting.
but yeah, no, it's fine that we have these shows to flesh out the universe and fill in the gaps, because that's always been Star Wars' thing. The movies introduce us to an idea, and the idea is explored and built upon in TV shows and books and whatnot. And yeah, you know what? I was growing up while the prequels were coming out. I remember what it was like to try and talk to somebody about them, and just to have them utterly tear these movies to shreds that I loved so much. And then to 15 years later, to have so many people turn around and say, oh, actually, they're underrated treasures. Like, just completely change their position. And, I'm not going to try and gatekeep this stuff.
I'm all for personal growth.
Yeah, if you've changed your mind, then great. If you've genuinely changed your mind. But it doesn't feel genuine sometimes. Because when you talk to these people about the prequels, they still point out all the silly stuff, all the stuff that they don't like, the dialogue, the writing, the CG. It's like, hang on, I thought you liked these movies. Like, can we talk about what you liked about them? Gotten way off topic here.
So bringing it back.
We're talking about best moments from the series. For me, it's the Purgle jump at the end of episode 5. It's some of the most visually stunning, audibly stunning Star Wars ever. It's just so good. I get so worked up every time we see it. Like, the build up to it, the music, just the visuals, the fact that we're this new Ahsoka now, this kind of reborn Ahsoka who's got a new and optimistic look. The moment she gets back in the ship and they're like, oh, do you know what you're doing? Nope, I have no idea. I love it.
But she has faith in the Force.
Yeah, going somewhere is better than going nowhere. I absolutely love that. And a very, very close second, and I still say it's the best entrance in all of Star Wars, is Thrawn's introduction in Episode 6. Like, the Chimera coming in, his organ theme that's been reworked and is just so powerful, and just legions of stormtroopers just chanting his name. It's so good. I absolutely love it. And my favorite entrance in Star Wars used to be the Emperor in Return of the Jedi, you know, with the Imperial March going and like the whole Death Star has just showed up for it. I'm sorry, Thrawn just blew him out of the water with that entrance. It's so over the top. It's so like, and you pointed it out when in the finale, when Morgan says, oh yeah, your troopers are prepared to sacrifice themselves for you. And he's like, oh, it's not for me. It's for the Empire. It's for you. You know it's for you. Like, you know it's for you.
Yeah. That just brings me to one point, is just how gorgeous this show was. It was so cinematic. Mm-hmm. Every shot was beautiful. Yep. And that was miles beyond, like, especially the Book of Boba Fett. I hate to keep bringing it back to that. Mm-hmm. But that was, they don't know how I feel about it. I don't really care for the Book of Boba Fett, but I feel like it felt so small. The sets felt really closed. Mm-hmm. You could tell it was done on
the volume.
Yeah, you could tell it was done on the volume. And it was just, it felt like a sitcom TV show kind of set. Mm-hmm. This felt so much like one of the movies again. It was just, every shot was just gorgeous.
The scale was like so much bigger, and the planets were so much more interesting than we've been seeing recently. Like Peridia, we went back to Lothal, we went back to Coruscant, we went back to these familiar places that looked different. Like Lothal looks different from when it was under the Empire. It looks so much better. And the same with Coruscant. We just saw Coruscant in Andor. How much better did Coruscant look in this? Like, it's so much brighter. And I'm not talking in like terms of quality, I'm talking in like, it feels like a nicer place to be, if that makes sense. And then you have the new planets, like you have Peridia, you have Arcana, these really diverse and interesting planets. Cetos looks great. That deep red forest, it's so good looking, and it's such a nice change of pace from Desert Planet. Yeah. Desert Planet with spiky trees. Desert Planet with rocks. Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of desert planets in the universe. But we don't need to go back to them all the time. We don't always have to go back to Tatooine. And I love Tatooine. Tatooine's a great planet. Pretty one note, though.
Yeah, sand.
Sand is everywhere.
Yeah.
So obviously we prefaced this with the fact that, yeah, we do love the show. We love the series. But like pretty much everything, we wouldn't be being truly honest if we didn't acknowledge some of the frustrations and some of the criticisms that we did have for the series. And there were some. They weren't very distracting for the most part, I don't think. And I wanted to preface this by saying that the majority of my complaints, and I don't even want to call them complaints, I mean, yeah, maybe they are complaints, but the majority of them don't have to do with the story, the narrative, the content of the show. It has more to do with the structure of the 8-episode series. And we've kind of touched on it already. You know, you did mention it feels very limiting, like there isn't enough time to explore the full story that they want to tell. It feels like stuff gets skipped over, moments that should have maybe had some more gravitas or been given a chance to breathe. They don't have a chance because we've got to keep things moving, except for when we don't keep things moving, you know, except when we do take our time, you know, and then the action gets pushed back and back and back.
I think my main problem, especially with Ahsoka, now this has more to do with marketing and studios making money and everything, but the episodic release of the show, and I know that that's how things have always been, whatever, we may have gotten used to the Netflix era of being able to binge everything, but shows like this really do benefit from being dropped all at once, and I know that the studios, they get more money when they're released this way.
Right.
If they're released over 2 months, people have to pay for 2 months worth of subscriptions that they may not have otherwise.
Right.
People are talking about it every week versus the first 2 weeks when they get to see it all and then they don't talk about it anymore. So I understand why they do it.
But at the same time, like, if there is an issue, like, for instance, with the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, when the second episode ended with the Grand Inquisitor being stabbed, people spent a whole week saying they've broken canon, they've killed the Grand Inquisitor, you know, what have they done, why don't they care about the history of the show, blah blah blah. So there's an upside to it with the money and people talking about the show, but people who have complaints coming out of the episode are complaining about them for a whole week.
Yeah, I think it really does the show a disservice that it's being released this way, because especially Ahsoka, the first 4 episodes either really could have been 2 or 3 episodes, or, you know, if they had been dropped all at once, it would have felt a lot more cohesive. Like, it would have felt like the story was moving a lot faster when we watched it all at once.
Yeah.
When we were watching it week to week, I was like, oh my god, we're still on the ship. Okay, we're still on Cetos. Like, get to the point.
Right.
And, you know, I loved everything that was happening, and I loved the relationship dynamic with Ahsoka and Sabine, but I just feel like it took so long to get to the point, and I understand why they did it, because if you think about it, by the time they get to Peridia, they're immediately on a time constraint. So by leaving those things to the last 3 episodes, we also feel that time constraint. But I feel like there's a way to reflect that kind of immediacy without feeling like you're rushing through it so quickly that you can't get to any of the good stuff.
Right.
Which is kind of how the end of the series felt to me. By the time we got to episode 6, I was so ready for them to get to the point.
Yeah.
And then they got to the point, and then they immediately moved on to the next thing, and you're like, okay, well, I wanted to spend a little bit more time with the point. It took so long to get here.
Right.
I want to revel in it a little bit more, and I don't feel like we got that. I wanted more conversations with Ezra and Sabine, and, you know, I'm not saying necessarily there should have been an exposition dump of what happened between the end of Rebels and the beginning of the show, but just a little bit more than 4 lines between the two of them in the episode would have been good for me.
And it also didn't help that Sabine was being so cagey about everything, because obviously she's dealing with the shame of what she had to do to get to Peridia, and so that's stopping her from giving Ezra what he needs and giving us the scene that we want to see. And it's a scene that ultimately we didn't get, because she never had to explain to Ezra how she got there. Like, she never had to tell Ezra that the way I got here was by helping the Empire get Thrawn back.
And nobody knows, because Ahsoka didn't tell Hera that Sabine went willingly.
Right.
Sabine didn't tell Ezra, so now they're stuck on Peridia, and nobody has any idea that all of this is Sabine's fault.
Yeah, Ezra can't tell Hera because Ezra doesn't know.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, I'm so glad that Sabine and Ahsoka were able to work it out, because they were the 2 characters who knew. Yeah. And, like, maybe there was a conscious decision on Ahsoka's part to not, I guess, throw Sabine under the bus.
Maybe it wasn't necessary for everyone to know, but it's just, I feel like maybe it was a little bit of a cop-out for Sabine's character.
Right, that she didn't have to deal with the consequences.
Yeah, there were no consequences for her making that decision. And, you know, Hu Yang says, well, maybe that was the only choice for her. Maybe that's true. But whether it was a good choice, bad choice, or the only choice, choices still have consequences.
Yeah, every single time. And I just feel
like we didn't get to see that. I mean, she got left behind, I guess that's kind of a consequence, but kind of brings me to my next point. I don't think that was necessary.
Oh, the Ahsoka and Sabine they've now just swapped places with Ezra.
Yeah.
I can't remember who it was that said it. Somebody going into Ahsoka was just like, oh, wouldn't it be really funny if Thrawn and Ezra got back to the real galaxy and then Ahsoka and Sabine got stuck there, and then they were quickly like, oh no, wait, that wouldn't work, that wouldn't be good. But that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, literally every single person who went to Peridia stayed there or died there, and people who were there came back.
Yeah, so they just swapped.
It really felt like 2 steps forward, 20 steps back. We're worse off than we were before, and I know that this is, you know, a stepping stone to the next big thing, but I think that's kind of why it fell flat for me, because it didn't feel like the show had a start, a middle, and an end. It felt like it had a start, it had a middle, and then it was a stepping stone on to the next thing. We're just gonna kind of forget about these characters. We're setting up, you know, Filoni's multi-series into one big Avengers-style movie. I think it really did the show a disservice by not giving it its own ending. And that says a lot about the industry. Like I think you said it, the Netflix phenomenon.
Yeah, it kind of leads me into my biggest issue with the way that we are telling serialized stories these days, and that's that we don't let them end. We write these seasons and we write these finales with almost an assumption that we're going to be renewed for the next step. Like, we're going to get to see the next season. Because if we don't, don't, then the story is left hanging open like an unfinished building. And there are a myriad of examples in just the streaming industry alone, because I think it is unique to the streaming era. We didn't used to write shows this way. And Star Wars especially didn't used to write shows this way. Star Wars shows, they had beginnings, middles, and ends. They left a hook in there that will get you back for the next season, but the hook wasn't all there was to the finale. This series, the main issue that I had with it is that the finale had more setup than it had resolution. You had the resolution of the main arc, which you can argue is getting Ezra back, and Ahsoka and Sabine sorting out their relationship. That was the main arc of the series. And the main threat of the series was Thrawn's coming back. And all of that was resolved. But in the last episode alone, we set up what's going to happen with Shin, what's going to happen with Baylan, how are Ahsoka and Sabine going to get back?
How are the Mortis gods connected?
Well, that too.
Eye roll.
What's happening between Thrawn and the Night Sisters? Because there's definitely some tension there.
Yeah, immediately, as soon as he blew up that tower, her face was just, now they're going to have issues.
Yeah, we're going to have problems. And that bit with Morgan, muttering for Dathomir under her voice when Thrawn leaves. There's something there. And I know it's unlikely. And I know that, Disney have vaults full of money. And they could just keep doing this no matter what the reception is. But what if we don't get a continuation? What if we have a situation like, I don't know, Solo, which set up a very, very interesting sequel that we never got to see.
So even the Rangers of the New Republic, the main actor got cancelled, so guess what? The show gets cancelled.
Yeah.
His actor seems very nice. I'm sure he's not going to be a problem. But what if Ezra's actor turns into a Jonathan Majors, and then all of a sudden you have this main character that's supposed to set up the next wave of the show? Oops, all of a sudden now we have to recast or kill him off or whatever. It's just, you're relying so much on, we're going to move on to the next thing, but then they're so fickle about whether or not they're actually going to do things. They haven't greenlit Ahsoka for a second season, so are we ever going to get answers to our question? Ray Stevenson died. What the hell are they going to do with Baylan?
I feel like we do have to address that elephant in the room. Ray Stevenson died. My one concern going into the finale was that we didn't wrap up Baylan's story, and we didn't. He was barely in it. He's off doing something. How are we going to continue that story? We've got options. Sure, we can recast, we can kill him off screen, we can do it in a book, we can use a weird CGI face mask. All of those options have mountains of controversy that could have been avoided if there were maybe 2 more episodes of the season to finish the bloody arc.
Or, I hate to say it, but, he did pass with enough time. Some of those scenes could have just been left out.
Yeah.
Some of his, talking about, there's another power on this planet, can't you feel it?
Right.
Up until that point, we thought that he was all pro-Thrawn, So if they're not planning on continuing this arc with him, just leave it out.
Yeah. Of the 2 options, I really hope they do continue the arc, but it's going to be so unfair for whoever they get to take over for Rey.
Huge shoes to fill.
It's going to be, because he's such a standout character. He did such a great job. And it's going to be so unfair on the next guy. Whether it is a fully fledged actor, I've seen people pitching the guy who played Sabretooth in the X-Men movies. They're pitching him to play Baylan moving forward because he's kind of got the same body structure. He speaks the same kind of way.
Sorry, I just immediately thought of the guy who gets his arm cut off in, what is that? Not Black Panther. I think it's Andy Serkis.
It is Andy Serkis. You're thinking it is Black Panther. It's in Age of Ultron he gets his arm cut off.
He's the only person I could really see that could fill in his shoes, but we've already had Andy Serkis live action. I know.
He's been in Star Wars twice already. And whether it is that or whether it's a faceless stunt guy that they get to do it with a weird CG face, which the CG faces are getting better. I'm not going to say that they're not getting better, but it's going to be so unfair on them and very expensive. And I feel like they're going to look at that expense and they're going to go, never mind.
Better not.
Yeah, and that means that, again, we're going to have this plot arc just hanging open. Like maybe there's a chance that, I don't know, maybe Baylan goes missing on Peridia looking for whatever it is he's looking for, and maybe Shin takes up the search, but she doesn't seem like she's into it. Yeah. She's off, she wants to rule the nomads, she wants to lead a little army of weird-looking samurai guys. She doesn't want what Baylan wants, and Baylan knew that. That's why he was like, okay, you go do your thing, thing, I'll go do my thing.
Right.
But yeah, the main issue with this stuff is, what if we don't get a resolution? We didn't get a resolution to Solo. Like, maybe bits of it in comics and books and stuff, but that was setting up 2 more movies. They've admitted that.
And I think that's where they started, which I really thought they backpedaled this issue with Mando Season 1, because Mando Season 1 was a pretty complete package. It had a good ending. There was the little hook at the end with Gideon coming out of the TIE fighter where you're like, oh, cool, there could be another season. Or not, but it's still a decent ending.
Yep, Season 2, same thing. Grogu goes off with Luke. Mando does... We don't even know what Mando does, because the episode ends right there.
Yeah.
But the arc is complete. Even, really, Mando Season 3, it has its flaws, I'm aware of that, but that ending...
So good.
Is so good. Like, Mando finally settles down. He's got his little house on Navarro.
I don't even want another season of Mando. I just think it was such the perfect ending.
Yeah.
Unless we're moving on to where the Mandalorian is going to be Bo-Katan. Sure, if they want to take it that direction, that's fine.
I mean, for a hot minute, we thought that Mando's story was over and the Mandalorian was going to be about Boba Fett for a while. I mean, it was a bad idea. I didn't like the idea. As much as I liked Book of Boba Fett, it kind of felt like Din's story was ending with Grogu going off with Luke, and then you had that hook at the end of the episode with Boba Fett taking over Jabba's empire. And we've talked about this, like, if the next time we see Mando and Grogu is when the New Republic's getting guys together, or not even the New Republic, maybe like a fledgling resistance, maybe, they're getting guys together to go and take on Thrawn, and Carson Teva's like, I know a guy on Navarro, and then you just hear the background music go, doo-woo-woo, and that's the next time we see him. I'd be so thrilled.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to keep going around and around in circles with shows that don't end.
Just as a little side note that doesn't really have anything to do with Ahsoka, it does a little bit.
Okay.
I do think potentially they're setting up the continuation of Mando. I don't think we've seen the end of the Darksaber, because now we have Hu Yang, who can fix a lightsaber.
Yeah,
so
that's very true. And I mean, we've managed to get through this whole video without really talking about Hu Yang, but he was
so good.
He was so good in this series, and that's why we didn't talk about him, because we're just like, oh yeah, Hu Yang's perfect.
I love David Tennant in anything. He's my favorite Doctor. He's just so good.
And he wasn't just comic relief. Like, he wasn't just there for Ahsoka to riff off of when nobody else was around. Like, he really contributed to the story, like, every step of the way.
Really pulled at your heartstrings as well. I told them to stay together.
Oh, that scene is so sad.
I never listened.
Oh, he's so upset. He's standing on that cliff holding Sabine's helmet, and he's just shattered.
We finally get to see his little arms in the back when he's helping Ezra build the lightsaber.
Oh yeah, it's brilliant. My little heart of, like, everything has to be in the right place was just breaking when Ezra was just going through all of his stuff and ruining his system.
Oh, because that's how you are too.
Yeah, I'm exactly that way. You know I am. So with all that said, with all the good stuff, all the not so good stuff, where did you land with the series?
If I had to give it a rating out of 10, I think I'm around a 7.
A 7?
Yeah, just because I loved the characters, I loved the general story of it. Yeah, I think it's maybe a 6.5 to 7. I just think I really, really wish it had more resolution.
Yeah.
I really needed to see more of the strings tied up at the end, and instead we just got more strings.
Yeah.
And
so many more strings.
And it really let down the show for me.
And it's crazy because, like, right up until Rebels Season 2 style montage at the end of the show, it's my favorite Star Wars live action show.
Yeah.
Like, right up until that moment. And then you get that sudden realization of, like, oh my god, I completely forgot we had no Baylan and no Shin in this. Their stories aren't finishing.
Yeah.
Ahsoka and Sabine are left behind, which I can live with, but I hope we get them out of there nice and promptly, I'm happy for a situation with, Grogu going off for 2 or 3 episodes and then coming back. I would like to see that again here. And if I take my real world anxieties about, the continuation of Ray Stevenson's character, the fact that the series didn't end, and if we don't get a continuation, it will just be another Solo situation. If I take that away, it's still a great show. And I'm sure, like, to take a leaf out of Thrawn's book and just look at the bigger picture and take a step back, I'm sure in like 5 or 6 years, when this is all wrapped up and over, I'm gonna feel like an idiot for being this worried about it, Of course it was gonna all work out out in the end. Of course they had a plan, but I just feel like they've proven in the past that the plan can change, and it's not always for the better.
Yeah.
Like, the Solo movie can just be the Solo movie. Rangers of the New Republic can just not happen.
Be sprinkled throughout the other shows.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of what they've done with it, but that's really the hardest thing for me to reconcile with, is that right up until that moment, it was my favorite live-action Star Wars show. It blew all of them out of the water, and I'm sure that as the time goes on and we end up getting the rest of the story, fingers crossed, we get a satisfying continuation for Baylan. We get a resolution that makes this all make sense, and we get to see how everything works out. And in that universe, it is still my favorite.
It's just frustrating that we have to wait for something that should have just been wrapped up in one piece.
Right. So I think the takeaway really is that the 8-episode structure for these shows, if there's one change you could make to Star Wars storytelling right now, that would be it. Because 2 more episodes would have fixed pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Just giving us 10 episodes instead of 8, letting us finish the damn story.
I think another part of that too is that by the time we got to the end, so much of it just fell flat.
Yeah, because of how long it took to get there.
Yeah.
And the fact that we didn't have the time left to properly digest it.
Like, Sabine took the whole episode, or the whole season, to finally figure out how to use her Force powers.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that she gets to it is just very lackluster.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, I'm being attacked by a Death Trooper, which I've probably, maybe not a literal Death Trooper before, like in this instance, but, she's always had to fight for her life, so it doesn't really make sense that that's when the Force kicks in.
Right. Yeah.
It would have made a lot more sense if it was in aid of Ezra, who she just cares so much about.
Mm-hmm. And that would have gone to prove that her attachment to Ezra isn't a weakness. It's not a threat. It's something that actually enabled her to unlock her potential.
Yeah, like Ezra's attachment to the Ghost Crew,
Yeah.
That brought him back from the dark side. So I just think that's something that I've always appreciated about Rebels, is that it gives a different spin on the Jedi's fear of attachment.
Mm-hmm.
And then it shows that it's not always a bad thing to love people.
Right. To have this, close-knit network of people that you really care about.
But I guess that's an argument for another day.
It is. It absolutely is. We've been at this for a very, very long time. I think it is probably about time that we wrapped up. Closing statement on the show.
I liked it. Could have been better.
Yeah. I mean, and I would even go so far as to say I loved it until that last 10 minutes or so.
Yeah.
And now I'm left plagued with anxiety and frustration for what's going to happen next. And you don't need to sell me on another season, because I need it, because the story's not finished.
Yep.
There's no choice in the matter. There has to be another season because they didn't finish the story.
Yeah, and we don't even know if we're getting another season, so...
Yeah, as of right now, as of the time of recording, it still hasn't been greenlit by Lucasfilm, so that was a very confident gamble on the part of Mr. Filoni.
Yeah. Yeah, I loved the show, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't have its pitfalls, which unfortunately it definitely did.
It had very, very high highs. Thrawn is just perfect for me. If all I took away from this series was Lars Mikkelsen playing Thrawn, I came away with an absolute win.
Yeah.
And I want more, and I know I shouldn't.
I guess, let us know down below what you think of the new, well, I don't want to say new format. This isn't going to happen every week, don't worry. It'll be back to our normal programming next week.
Right. It'll be back to just me sitting in front of my toys talking about more toys.
But if you like this sort of long-form content you can just listen to on the go, if you like hearing us ramble about Star Wars together, let us know. Maybe we can do a couple more of these episodes. Maybe have a once-a-month sort of podcast-style long video for you.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of movies and a lot of shows that I've very, very deliberately stayed away from talking about for a very long time, because this feels so final. I'm putting my opinion out there, and this is it, this is what it is, and that's always a risky game, especially when it's Star Wars, and you can guarantee no matter what you say about it, someone's going to disagree.
Sometimes it's me.
Sometimes it's you. It's been you a few times.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that. But yeah, if you are still hanging out with us, thanks very much for sticking with us for as long as this ended up being, however long that is after my fantastic wife has gone through and edited everything, cut out all of our mistakes. We are really not cut out for live work yet. There's so much that needs to be polished on this. But yeah, next week on the channel, Fine Editions is back. We're going to be talking about the great additions I had to my collection over the months of August and September.
Maybe one of mine as well.
And maybe one of yours as well, because sometimes there are these things that need to be talked about. And then, of course, the Wishlist series will be back the following week, and we are talking about the Book of Boba Fett. So keep an eye out for that. Let us know down below your thoughts on the series, your thoughts on just listening to us talk about Star Wars for however long this is. I mean, we love talking about this stuff, so, I mean, and we kicked around the idea of starting a podcast even separate from the channel. If that's something that people are interested in hearing, then yeah, let us know down below. Be very interested to find out what your thoughts are.
Basically just sitting in on an evening with us, because this is just conversations we have all the time.
Yeah, this is just what an evening looks like in our household when we're both not preoccupied with something else. In the meantime, however, I've been Grand Moff Tony.
I've been the wife.
And you may subscribe when ready. You okay?
Yep.
Is that going to be an issue?
No, it's fine.
Okay. And... And...
Sorry.
Like...
Coruscant.
Yeah. Thank you. Forgot what the name of the bloody planet was.
Never too late to pivot.
Yeah. Pivot!